Hello, and thank you for joining us on another volatile day for the markets as tariff uncertainty grips Wall Street. The Dow started the day in the green, but by the time markets closed, it fell more than 300 points. The Nasdaq is down 2%. The S&P 500 is down 1.5%. President Trump's broad reciprocal tariffs are set to go into effect Wednesday. The White House says dozens of nations have already reached out to negotiate a path forward, and the president says these talks will be unique for each country.
I call them tailored deals, not off the rack. These are tailored, highly tailored deals. Right now, Japan is flying here to make a deal. South Korea is flying here to make a deal, and others are flying here. We've had talks with many, many countries, over 70. They all want to come in.
Despite these talks, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer told a Senate committee Tuesday the administration is not planning on offering exemptions and doesn't want what he called a Swiss cheese solution. More on that later. China, the world's second largest economy, also said Tuesday it's willing to, quote, fight to the end amid a tariff back and forth with the U.S. President Trump is set to raise the tariff rate against China to 104% Wednesday after Beijing put an additional 34% tariff on U.S. products. This is on top of 10 to 15% tariffs that imposed on some U.S. agricultural goods and energy and farming equipment. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is here with me on set to break down the markets. White House reporter Inocencio is in Washington, and congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is on Capitol Hill. Stocks started the day up, then they were down. I mean, is this really like hour by hour reacting to news reports, or what's happening?
Minute by minute, it feels like.
Minute by minute.
So look, what happened is that there were talks of potential negotiations that we just heard the president say, and investors were really excited about that. It was also, frankly, it was a good buying opportunity because some companies have lost so much in value that they were at a better price than they have been in the past month or two. So as the day went on, and you can really see it in the chart there, and we get closer and closer to this midnight deadline and the closing bell, investors didn't see those deals materialize. And they got a little bit more anxiety that these tariffs are, in fact, going to go into effect. They're going to be as severe as what we heard last week. And that raises the question of inflation and slowing consumer spending.
Let's go through some of these other developments. Canada says 25% tariffs on American auto parts will go into effect Wednesday. This is after the U.S. put 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars, imported cars. Last year, Canada imported more than $20 billion worth of American cars. So how big of a hit will this be to U.S. car manufacturers?
So U.S. car manufacturers really rely on Canada for sales. I mean, Ford, GM, these big automakers, they do really well in Canada. In fact, Ford, I was just looking it up before I got on with you, saw a 16% increase in their sales in Canada last year. So it's a growing market for them. The thing well, yeah, fair. I guess time will tell. Specifically about this this tariff that's going into place. So it's the exact same as the U.S. So it's a 25% tariff on all the cars that are not covered under that trade agreement, the USMCA, and then the portion of the car that is made in the U.S. for vehicles that are covered under the USMCA. Yes, by your face, I know, because the thing is that the U.S. has that on these other countries, and they can't figure out how to actually calculate that. Okay. So it's sort of on hold. So you're not the only one that is confused right now. So because it's more specific, it's hard to tell exactly how much this is going to impact these automakers, because these three giant automakers, most of their cars would fall under that USMCA agreement. But yes, they do rely on this market.
We just heard the president say Japan wants to make a deal, South Korea wants to make a deal. Does any of that matter if China doesn't make a deal?
This is really interesting because if everyone else made a deal with the U.S., including the EU and Canada and Mexico, had all sort of figured out the things that are going on, then yes, that's going to leave China in a tough spot, because right now China has struggled to come out of the pandemic as strongly as they had hoped, and they are relying on exports and selling their goods to other countries in order to make that economic recovery. So if everyone else sort of teams up and makes a deal, then that is going to be tough for China. But if you do see some of these different countries decide to ally and keep the U.S. out, then yeah, China's on decent ground.
The Wall Street Journal reports that Apple is going to import more iPhones to the U.S. from India to avoid the 104% tariff from China. Look, the White House wants companies to manufacture in the U.S. That's one of the goals of this tariff policy, they continue to say. Apple's investing $500 billion in the U.S., but this suggests that exactly what you've been talking about for weeks is that mass production in the U.S. shifting operations doesn't happen overnight. What are your takeaways from that?
Well, it's exactly that. So, this was reported by the Wall Street Journal. If this is true, it's exactly what I'm hearing from a number of other businesses as well, that they are looking for other options besides China, like a Vietnam or an India. And it doesn't
Still
even
not the
matter
US.
right, but what they're thinking is, well, a 32% tariff is better than 104%. Right. And so we're going to take that because, to your point, the infrastructure, the electricity, the energy, a lot of things that's going to be required, the manpower to make all of this happen is not going to happen overnight in the U.S.
All right, Kelly O'Grady, thank you. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now. Aaron, how is the White House approaching these negotiations with individual countries?
Well, they certainly are entertaining it more than maybe we first started to see last week when Trump announced these tariffs. President Trump and White House officials have claimed that up to 70 countries have reached out. We still haven't seen a full list of those specific countries, but White House officials today, including President Trump, have reiterated at least two conditions that countries should look at when they come to the negotiating table. One, find a way to reduce their trade deficit with the United States, and two, remove any trade barriers such as safety regulations on automobiles, on U.S. goods that they're taking in. And Israel specifically was cited by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt as a, quote, model on both of these points. Important to note, though, with these tariffs expected to take place and go into effect tomorrow, even President Trump acknowledged there's not necessarily time for these countries to avoid tariffs and make a deal before they actually get hit with them.
How far is the White House willing to go when it comes to China before backing down?
White House officials really signaled that they are not backing down on this. Caroline Leavitt, during her briefing, said that those tariffs will go into effect at midnight. It seems clear that they're not only calling China's bluff on retaliatory tariffs, but are also inviting them to make the first move and kickstart negotiations when it comes to trade. We also heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this morning, who openly questioned what the United States has to lose if China raises tariffs on U.S. goods, noting that U.S. exports to China make up 1/5 of what they export to us. And we also heard from White House officials such as Stephen Miller, who talked about potential trade deals with other neighboring countries, with other big trading partners such as Canada, Mexico, and Europe that could potentially isolate China and put pressure on them to make a deal.
Elon Musk and President Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro are publicly feuding over these policies. Can you explain what's going on?
Yeah, Peter Navarro and Elon Musk have been feuding in recent days because Navarro has criticized Tesla and Musk, his criticism of the tariffs. Yesterday, Navarro called Musk and Tesla, quote, a car assembler using foreign-made parts rather than a car manufacturer, in an attempt to note why Elon Musk is against these global tariffs. Today, Musk responded and called Navarro, quote, a moron, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks, and claimed Tesla has the most American-made cars. In response, we heard from Caroline Leavitt, who spun this as a moment of transparency from the White House and said, quote, boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue.
Aaron Navarro, thank you. International markets are watching closely as President Trump's reciprocal tariffs are set to take effect Wednesday. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio has more from London.
The global market bloodbath took a breather today. Investors felt hope and saw opportunity to buy across Europe and Asia, ending 3 trading sessions of plunges. The FTSE 100 here in London, Germany's DAX and France's CAC 40 closed near highs of the day, up about 2.5%. And that followed Asia markets also closing higher. Japan's Nikkei closed up by a little more than 6%. And one of the main drivers for all of the green on the boards was that President Trump said that Tokyo is sending a negotiating team to the United States. So there is hope that if Japan can strike a deal, other countries might be able to as well. China markets closed higher, but less so because Beijing has chosen retaliation over negotiation. But in more hope, Trump said that South Korea is now also sending a delegation to talk. I spoke to chief market analyst Chris Beecham here at IG Group, and he says that jumps today are still probably what we call a dead cat bounce.
It's rare that you see markets bottom so quickly.
It has only been 3-4 trading days.
It's exactly only been 4 trading days. Usually these crises are more drawn out. We do have obviously one specific cause, and if tariffs were taken away tomorrow, you'd expect that to be the bounce. But the worry is that we haven't seen the low just yet, or the final low.
So hold on for possibly more falls. Trump's reciprocal tariffs are scheduled to take effect after midnight tonight in Washington, and IG Group sees the U.S. now at about a 40% risk of recession this year, similar to other major financials. Back to you.
Ramy and Inocencio, thank you. President Trump's U.S. trade representative is defending the administration's sweeping new tariffs while facing tough questions from some senators. Jamieson Greer spoke in front of lawmakers on the Senate Finance Committee Tuesday, and they pressed him on the tariffs' potential impacts. Greer said there's been good news already, with representatives from nearly 50 countries approaching him personally to discuss the new policy and ways to reach reciprocity. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion asked Greer about his comments following the hearing.
Why aren't there any exemptions with some of these tariffs, sir?
The president decided that we're not going to have exemptions. We can't have a Swiss cheese solution to this universal problem that we're facing.
Nikole Killion joins us now. So, Nikole, what else do we learn from Greer's testimony?
You know, that was really the crux of his argument to lawmakers, that the trade deficit has really ballooned over the last several decades. It's well over $1 trillion. And so in order to get it down, that this type of action on the part of the president is needed. It's something that can't be fixed overnight. So that is the case that he tried to convey, and the argument that he tried to make to lawmakers in terms of why the president is taking this action now. And as you heard him say there, which he also reiterated to lawmakers, is that at least at this particular time, that the president doesn't have any plans to enact any exemptions. And that is something that Greer was pressed on pretty extensively by both Democratic senators and Republican senators, who really, had a lot of questions and skepticism about whether this tariff policy will ultimately work. They talked about the calls they are getting from small business owners, from people on Main Street, and from their respective communities, from farmers. And so they really wanted to kind of know what the end game is here, whether or not the president could be more targeted in his approach versus taking this blanket approach with tariffs. But again, as you heard the trade representatives say there, that's not going to be the case at this time.
So how are lawmakers you spoke to reacting to the hearing?
Well, by and large, the reaction was mixed. I did ask a number of lawmakers whether they felt satisfied after the trade representative's testimony today. Take a listen to what two senators, one Republican and one Democrat, told me.
The purpose of the tariffs are to bring people to the negotiating table. And if the president does that, that's a satisfactory answer.
You look at the whole world's reaction, and we can call that a good day in hospice or a dead cat bounce in terms of the markets today. Tonight at midnight, because you'll start seeing prices rise, I think, later this week. That will, I think, shock some more of my Republicans into speaking in person what they say to me privately.
So obviously, that was Democratic Senator from Virginia, Mark Warner. Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa, who I would note, by the way, is a sponsor of a bipartisan bill that would claw back congressional authority over trade policy. And that's why I asked him if he was satisfied with the trade representative's answers, because he did talk about, what he is hearing from farmers in Iowa. And again, really tried to press Greer on what that end game might be. Similarly, Senator Warner also talked about these small businesses in Northern Virginia that rely on getting a lot of their materials from different parts of the world, and that this is really crushing a lot of small business potentially. So there was a lot of concern expressed at this hearing. But again, lawmakers are, at least Republicans, are trying to keep an open mind. That's what Senator Grassley is trying to do. But at the same time, many remain concerned, again, about what that end game might be.
I got to be quick with you, but what is the latest on the budget resolution?
Well, obviously, that is a key part of the president's agenda right now. House Republicans are hoping to clear the latest version of this budget resolution this week. But so far, there's still a lot of arm twisting going on, even after a meeting earlier today at the White House between the president and some House Republicans. But Speaker Johnson is still confident he can get it done this week.
I don't know how you have time to track down all these topics, all these lawmakers to get interviews on top of all the hits you do for us. Nikole Killion, thank you as always.